Well, we are in our Sabbath series right now, and today is actually going to be kind of our last week of more of a traditional teaching setting, because next week we're going to do Q&R. Does anybody know what Q&R is? Question and response. There you go. Q&R. So Pastor Patrick and I next week are going to be answering some of your questions that have been trickling in. And if you have a question or something pops in your mind this morning, welcome to be on your phone, as long as it's TRC Live or you're texting us. No, it's okay. Or tweeting a really good quote of me with an awesome picture. You're welcome to do that as well. But we have been going through this series, and we've had different questions kind of pop up in small groups, or some of you have come to me and said, hey, what about this, or what about that? And so we are gathering all those up, and we're just going to have a time of question and response. So a time for you guys to get your questions answered. I know sometimes we roll through a series like this, and you're like, well, what about? And then you never get that chance to ask that question, and we just roll into the next Sunday and the next series and keep it going. You're like, I still have questions from like a year ago. You said in our joyful series this. Well, now we're creating space for that. So if you have a question now, you have a question this week, you have a question Saturday night, text it to us. So can we get the slide up of the text us? It is 916 641 1300. There you go. 916-641-1300. This is actually our landline as well. So if you look up the River Church, it's the same number. You can just, instead of calling us, because nobody calls anybody anymore, let's be honest, all you get is like bot calls about advertisements. But yeah, text us, 916-641-1300. Any question you guys have in this series or what's going on, stuff like that. So, jumping in, we have been in this series for 5 weeks now, and we've been talking about all sorts of different topics within Sabbath and talking about Old Testament scriptures. We've been talking about New Testament scriptures. We've been talking about scriptures from Jesus. We've been talking about all sorts of things, even all the way back to Genesis 1. And this idea of Sabbath and trying to discover a Sabbath in our overscheduled world. And that we wrestle sometimes with this idea of Sabbath because they think, oh my gosh, I got to give up 24 hours to God. There's only so many hours in the week, and there's only so many, I believe it's 168 hours in a week. How do we give up 24 of that? And we began to walk through Sabbath just isn't for us. It isn't for us whether we get a nap or not on Sunday afternoons. Sabbath is meant to serve other people. Sabbath is meant to in my situation with my wife, trying to figure out what can I do maybe during the week to allow my wife to be able to Sabbath and to find rest one day a week. And in our household, Sabbath happens to be on Friday for us. Sunday morning and Sundays are just too crazy. We're running around. We got stuff going on here. Sometimes we got small groups Sunday afternoon at our house. There's always something going on Sunday. So Sunday really isn't a Sabbath for us, but Friday is. And so we've been going through and talking of how would it look like to have a Sabbath for us on Friday? What does that look like? Does that look, how do we try to get things done during the week, maybe get the laundry done, get those dishes done, and maybe even Friday you just let the dishes pile up. Or our favorite is we just go out to eat. So you don't have dishes. Let somebody else do the dishes. But how do we have this idea of Sabbath and loving God in our rest and loving others in our rest? And Pastor Patrick has thrown out and got us started with this of 4 questions. What is the Sabbath? We've been answering this and going through all sorts of different aspects of it. We've been asking the question, is the Sabbath important? It's very clear, I think, in scriptures of how this is laid out, very, very important. What are we called to do? What are we called to do in the Sabbath? Whether it's for us to stop what we're doing and find rest, maybe in something that gives us life instead of drains life out of us. Maybe it's to serve somebody else. Maybe it's to take a pause. Maybe last week we talked about creation and Sabbath. Maybe we need to just go out and get out of our 24/7 concrete jungles that is the urban city or suburban city and just go and be in God's creation and nature and immerse ourselves in that and have the creation of God speak to us and to fulfill us? And what will we do? Ultimately, that's the question. We all kind of know what we're supposed to do, but we never really make that step to actually do it. So what will we do in light of what we learned? So this idea of Sabbath and having one more week, I've been wrestling with this week, what is kind of some final words I want to share on Sabbath? And I think Pastor Patrick started us off on this, that Sabbath is something that's much bigger than us. It's something much bigger than whether we get to take a nap this afternoon or not. And we learn a lot from our society and culture around us. We do. We learn a lot just watching the world around us go in the flow, but it hasn't always been like that. It hasn't always been like that because for a long time in history, the church was an influence on culture. The church was the one that says, we're going to do things like this, and then society and culture followed along. I mean, guys, back in the day, some of you know those back in the days, but towns would literally shut down on Sundays. It'd be like a ghost town. You'd think everybody just died overnight and we're gone. Businesses were closed, restaurants didn't open their doors, gas wasn't sold. The only places that people drove were to church and then back home. That's all they did. Drive to church and drive back home. And for a lot of people had to prepare for and work around Sundays. You had to be in preparation to know, okay, if I'm on E and I got 10 miles to go and church is 10 miles away, I better go get gas on Saturday. Because you could get to church, but then you're pushing that car home in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. It was so much so that coaches and sports teams and teachers, they would work around the church. They wouldn't have practice on Wednesday nights because of youth group for the students. They wouldn't have homework for the students because they know that they would be going to church, and so they didn't want to put that burden on the student. But things have changed, haven't they? Things have changed. Imagine with me, real quick, that if all the businesses in Natomas closed on a Sunday, you couldn't buy any groceries, couldn't buy gas, couldn't go out to eat. Sorry, ladies, there'd be no Target runs. Walmart will be closed, no Starbucks. I'd have to brew my own coffee on Sunday morning. No In-N-Out, no Rayleigh's. We can kind of get a glimpse of that with Chick-fil-A. It is scientifically proven that you crave Jesus chicken that much more on Sunday morning because it's closed. You can't have it. Somebody give me some love. But thankfully, this is not the case because I've had some diaper emergencies on Sunday morning, and I praise Jesus that Target was open because it was going to get ugly that afternoon in our household. But because of this, we've kind of become accustomed to having stores and the availability of what we need when we need it 24/7, 365. I mean, you can go on Amazon at any hour, any part of the day and just buy something, and sometimes it's at your house in 2 hours. And if it's delayed 3, we're all up in a fit because it's not there when they said it was going to be there, or the 30-minute pizza rule. 31 minutes, I'm not paying for that pizza. But slowly over time, there's been a shift. And the church has become less and less influential, and culture began to influence the church. It began to influence our time and how we spent it, how we used it, how we saved it, how we had it reserved, and would put us to test at different times in a 24/7 culture around us. And there began to develop this conflict of how we used our time, how we set it aside, how we scheduled it, how we made use of it versus the flow and the go, the world around us. And this idea of Sabbath and setting aside 24 hours for God is a struggle for us. This idea of stopping what we're doing, stopping finishing the to-do list, stopping what we're used to, and watching the world around us continue to go, and yet God is calling us to just stop. In a very real way, the Sabbath puts the church at odds with the world because it reorients the church's relationship to time and even offers the world a prophetically different way of imagining its orientation towards time. For thousands of years, we've been at this battle, and honestly, we've been terrible examples ourselves. Am I right? We in the church, followers of Christ, know we need to Sabbath, and yet we don't Sabbath. We know that we need to slow down and we need to find this rest and refuel and restoration like our series says, but we don't. And the story continues today as the church has uncritically assimilated its life and sense of time to the life of the world. We've given up. We've stopped fighting it. We stopped trying to go against it. We stopped trying to protect our time and just let the rest of everything else dictate how we spend our time. But it didn't stop there, did it? We learn about sexuality from our culture. We learn about our leadership techniques from corporations. And we become and began to live according to the time of the world. See, there's two words in the Bible for time. And you guys might have heard this before if you've been around the church for a while, but there's chronos time and there's kairos time. So what's the difference? What's this chronos time? Well, chronos time is the time that we know. It's the 24 hours in the day. It's the big hand, it's the little hand as it goes around and never stops. We're learning about clocks in our home, so that's why I say little hand and big hand. So we're still learning. But this is just ongoing time. And Jesus talks about this in John 14, verse 9. We get the slide up on the screen. It says, Jesus answered, "Don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time." Chronos. "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father," Jesus said. But then Jesus also talks about this kairos time. And what's this kairos time? Well, kairos time is God's time. See, God isn't stuck within a 24-hour cycle clock, 365 days a year. God's time is beyond that. I know for some of us it's hard. I even struggle trying to comprehend how does God fit in time? He is all places, everywhere, doing everything. It's one of those things. It's like, man, I'm glad God is bigger than that, but it's hard to comprehend. And Jesus even said in Mark chapter 1, verse 16, the chronos has come. The kairos has come. The kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe the good news. This is God's time. It's not time that we know or we can schedule or we can write down on a calendar. It's God's time. In this book we've been reading through this series, it says it is the discerned or sacred and anointed time of something. And too often the church lives in the chronos, the Monday through Friday, 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 time, and entirely ignores kairos time, ignores God's time. When was the last time that you or I consulted God on our calendar? Maybe you and I need to think about that and that become a regular thing for us. Because we know we're called to live different than the world around us. Before this series, we went through a series on salt and light and the different life that God has called us to, and salt, this idea of transformation. and becoming different because we've come into contact with our Creator. And he's given us a set of guidelines known as the Bible of how we are to live our lives. And we should be different when we come into contact with what he teaches us and how he guides us. And light being this idea of a witness. Because of our transformation, we shine differently than the world around us. We look different. We act different. We speak different. Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. So if the world around us is go, 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 never stop, stop, ever go, push, we should be different than that. The book, there's a great quote, says the Sabbath was, for all intents and purposes, a visible sign to the outsider of one's identity within the covenant community of Israel, announcing to the world who Jews were and who their God was. See, in Exodus chapter 31, God tells them, hey, you must observe my Sabbaths, my rests, because this will be a sign between me and you for generations to come, so that they may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. Salt and light. Salt, Lord making us holy. Light being a sign between you and me for generations to come. The Sabbath was not merely a day. The Sabbath was a sign to everyone for generations to come. A perpetual witness for the covenant between God and Israel. And we see that same covenant being passed on to us when Christ came and died on the cross for us. He continued to teach and to proclaim this idea of a Sabbath rest. Why? So that we would be witnesses. The Jews actually believed that if you wanted to know who God knew, or you want to know who knew God, you could tell by looking at their schedules. Certainly, we can testify to people's doctrinal perspectives by discussing what they say they believe. But people's schedules and budgets often reveal their doctrines more than anything that they say. One Jewish scholar goes on as far as to say that if Jews did not keep their Sabbath, they would run the risk of going extinct. It was that important to their witness to the world. Christian Sabbath keeping is a calendared sign, a confession that Jesus Christ is Lord and we are not. What do our calendars say about us? Do they tell other people that Christ is Lord and leader of our life? Would people know if they found out that you came to church every Sunday, it would blow their mind because they don't see that maybe necessarily during the week. They see our car still in the driveway 4 out of 5 weeks sometimes on a Sunday morning. Is Jesus and church just a hobby? Is it something that you do but you really don't let everyone know about it? How's that witness? There's a lot of new developments and neighborhoods and things going on all around Natomas and South Natomas. And since the building moratorium has been lifted, there's been just this boom of like these ghost communities where it was like you had all the streets and the signs and the sewer and the electrical and the water just kind of taped off and just sticking there on just an empty plot of land. But what's the first thing they build when they start developing those communities? The model homes. They build the model homes. Why? It's a huge selling point. Because no matter how amazing the video walkthrough or fly through or layout and no matter how incredible the kitchen may be like state of the art with like perfect like design and have such a luxurious bathroom, until you and I walk through that home, till we step foot in that space and begin to imagine ourselves living there, our daily lives, our cooking meals for our family, coming home from work and walking to the house, going to bed at night, getting up in the morning, our whole regular routine, until we see and experience and physically be in that home, sometimes it's hard for us to comprehend. And that's what you and I are. That's what we are. We are the model home for Christ to those around us. For others to see us, to live life with us, to watch us from a distance, to see how we handle ourselves maybe in a stressful situation. The language that we use, the priorities we keep of whether we come to church on Sunday or not. People are watching. We are to be live model homes for people to see, experience, and physically be around, to show how God created community and how people should and can live with a Sabbath rest. The Bible is loaded with stories of how God called different people to live a different life, to be a witness. A big one of this is in the Old Testament in Daniel chapter 1. And King Nebuchadnezzar had taken captivity all of Israel, and to be the cool new big king that he was, he gathered up all of the best looking, strongest, most intelligent men, young men, to start a mentee program and basically develop future leaders for his kingdom. And part of that, what we know as Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You watch VeggieTales, it's Benny. But these guys were grouped up into this group of select people. And the king was going to start a 3-year program to develop these to some of the best warriors, some of the best teachers. And the king held nothing back. He gave them the best choice food and the best wine in the land to drink. Everything that would be fit for a king, he gave to this group of men. But Daniel, following the direction of God had put on his heart, knew that because of what God had called him to do and how to live his life, he was to refrain from the rich, choice food. And asked his commanding officer, hey, me and my buddies, we're not going to eat that food. We're just going to have fruits and vegetables and water. Because we know what this food can do to us. And the commanding officer, out of fear for his own loss of job, to go like, the king to come down and say, what happened to these guys? He said, no, we can't do that. I could lose my head. Daniel said, okay, give us 10 days. 10 days. And so when everybody else was eating whatever they want and gorging on all this food and everything, Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego ate fruit, vegetables, and water. And after 10 days, they came out to be the strongest, the fittest, the best looking, the smartest of the whole group of men. And God had called them to live a different life so they could be a witness. Because of that group of men had even greater influence and opportunity to speak into the life of the king and to witness and to proclaim, well, why did you do this? Well, God called me to. That's an incredible God. Tell me more about him. I want to know. And when you and I, when we live differently and we go against the flow of society and rest and Sabbath, people begin to take notice. They begin to see what? They're not frantic on Sunday night before Monday hits. What's going on? They seem to be happier on Sunday. They seem to have this smile on them that circumstance can't take away. We begin to look differently because of the way that we live. And we don't just live differently for the sake of living differently, but rather that we would know the contrarian patterns become signs to the world of who we are. But we are time and time again given over to the forgetting of who God has called us to be, and we slip back into living according to the ways of this world. If you want to begin to have opportunities to share what Christ has done in your life, begin to live according to how God has outlined our life in Scripture. And that includes a Sabbath. That includes taking a rest in a frantic world that tells us we can't ever have a rest. Because what it'll do, it'll create double takes. It'll create double takes. People will be going through their lives and they'll go, what? That doesn't make sense. There's something going on. I can't put my finger on it. There's something going on there. I want to know more about it. Why? Because when Sabbath is different and oftentimes weird, I'll admit, Sabbath is a little weird. It's okay, we can laugh about that. And inconvenient at times, honestly. There's only so many hours in the day. It's inconvenient. I get that, guys. But life is not one to be of convenience. And there are so many stories that relate to the Sabbath that come to mind of prominent figures in society. There's one that I was reading about, Sandy Koufax. He was a super famous pitcher for the LA Dodgers. A little love for the Dodgers. And he refused to pitch the first game of the World Series because of his Sabbath obligation. You get to open the World Series, and he says, no, it's a Sabbath. The guy had countless hours of practice, thousands of pitches, early mornings, late nights, foods, and specific diets that he said no to certain foods so he could be a top peak physical condition. And that moment that he had been probably dreaming for his entire life of being able to throw the first pitch and open the whole game of that World Series that could change the course of his career. We're talking massive money on the line here. And he says, no, my obligation to God is bigger than this. You also hear about Eric Liddell, the famous runner depicted in the Chariots of Fire. He refused to race on Sunday as well. You think that turned some heads? You think that probably got the attention of some people? When someone does something inconvenient in a world that worships convenience, it makes us take a double take. Sabbath causes double takes. It's inconvenient, causes problems, it's weird, and that's good. Eric Lane was quoted as saying, Sabbath freedom is not the freedom to spend our time wisely. Instead, Sabbath freedom is the freedom to live large. See, Sandy knew there was something bigger at stake than just throwing a baseball. Sandy knew the reality and the implications of the choice that he made in that moment. But he was living for something larger than himself. The church is an amazing and incredible thing. I mean, to look out here and to see the mix of personalities and cultures and preferences and desires and jobs. The church is amazingly unique. There's nothing like it in the world where you would find literally like a manager of a Taco Bell sitting next to a CEO of, say, Verizon or some incredible, amazing company. Would those two people outside the church ever cross paths? Maybe if one was holding the door for the other person walking by on the street. But to sit down, to have community, to worship together. See, God, when he sees the church, he doesn't just see an old person or a young person. He doesn't see people that are poor, people that are rich. He doesn't see those that come from a conservative background or a liberal background. He doesn't see how we vote, Republican, Independent, Democrat. He doesn't see our beliefs of whether we're more leaning towards a Pentecostal, wanting to shout and dance and raise our hands and worship, to those that are more conservative and maybe come from a Baptist background. God doesn't see any of that. God sees a group of people that are his, that are loved by him, cared for him, redeemed by him, and are worshiping together in community, learning who he is to worship him for all that they have. That's the church. And there's no other place on the face of the planet you would ever find such a unique, diverse, special gathering of people. And it's not just another day on the calendar, guys. Sunday just isn't just this time just to, maybe I'll make it, maybe I won't. I'm running a little behind. I'll just stay home. We must once again envision the Sabbath not in terms of a day that just happens, but in terms of a discipline that transforms us inside. Sabbath is a proactive, intentional discipline, not an add-on we get when we make space for it or happen to find space for it. If aliens showed up today, just hang in there with me, okay? If aliens showed up today and never had seen people on earth before, what would they say we worship on Sundays? Sports? Football? Love me some football. Youth sports, the great outdoors, brunches with friends, bottomless mimosas, music festivals. What would they see? Just another day on the calendar? Would they see something different? The survey of Sunday's activities raises the question of whether these pursuits have become dominant and take our ultimate attentions. See, the difference between the church and the world is that the church worships God, the Creator. But have we become to live our lives where we worship money, our jobs, our family, maybe even worship the church itself? Truth is, we all worship something. Whether we want to admit it or not, we all worship something in our lives. And only you can answer that for yourself. But since the fall in Genesis, there's been this struggle of what to worship. For thousands of years, the biblical story of humans is that we are prone to worship good things that God has made over God himself. And we find throughout the Bible time and time again that God dethrones these things and says, worship me. Not food, not sports, not fun. And God celebrates these things. He made them for us. They're good. But God's intention was never that we would replace him with other activities and other stuff. And so it's no wonder that when we go through life, we find this struggle on Sundays to Sabbath, to rest, to take time to give witness to those around us, and to worship God. There's a quote from the book that I want to read, and I have it on a slide. If we could put that up there. It says, "The day of worship, when Christians gather in the name of Jesus, is stuffed to the brim with so many activities that we neglect to do the very thing we are called to do on that day: worship God." Worship God. So what have we crowded our worship out with? See, there are things that we make sure to make time for and protect. And those are good things. Date night with my wife, work, time with the family, vacations, our to-do list. I had to go out and mow my lawn yesterday, even though I didn't want to, because I didn't want to get a notice from the HOA. That's the best looking lawn on the block. We have things that we have to do, that we are drawn in, that are just part of our obligations of life. Watching football, eating good food, and going outdoors are not bad things. These are tremendously good things. They're amazing. Good things to live for. However, in making the day of worship all about these good experiences, we crowd out the encounter that has once brought Christians together as a body. It's more than just a day to worship. It's more than just a day to relax. It's more than just a day to give witness to those around us of our priorities and the things that we make time for. I talked with a couple of you before, and you said when you get to work on Monday, and people say, "Oh, what'd you do over the weekend?" "I went to church." You know how to end a conversation real quick? That's how you do it. People don't know how to handle that. They, do it. Cool, sounds good. Yeah, I didn't do anything. See you, bye. You just don't know how to handle that. Sabbath is a lordship issue. It's not just a suggestion. And it's never been about something that we create. It's not about whether we schedule it or don't schedule it or prioritize or protect it. Time and time again, the Bible uses language regarding Sabbath that is something that we enter into, not that something we create. See, God continues to Sabbath even if we don't Sabbath. This isn't something like, oh, Bill cleared his schedule on Sunday. Let's Sabbath. No, God continues to Sabbath whether we are Sabbathing or not. And he's just sitting there waiting for us to enter into it. Waiting for us to become a witness to who God is. Waiting for us to come and worship in community. Waiting for us to get the rest and refueling and the relaxation and the refreshment that we need so that we can take on another week that takes us and pulls us away from God. It reorients us, recenters us into who our Creator is and why that we even are here on this earth. There is Chronos time for meetings, schedules, preaching, evangelism, but there is also Kairos time, which can only be discerned for a word that must be spoken, a prophetic utterance, a confession, a Christ meeting, a teaching from his word, a moment of worship and community. So what time are you on? Are you on a TikTok time? Or are you, and I know this is going to sound really cheesy, are you on God talk time? TikTok, God talk. Do you live in a 24-hour rat race? Or do you live in a holy hour? Or when you look at your schedule, you say, God, how do you want to use me this week? How do you want me to get in line to what you're doing and what you're moving and what you're saying and how you're being and everything that you are. I want to get in line with that. Instead of running around, filling our schedules with all sorts of different stuff and letting other people dictate how we live our lives rather than letting God show us how we are to live our lives. So back to the 4 questions again. Put those on screen. What is the Sabbath? A witness. A time for community. For worship. Is the Sabbath important? I think we've pretty much answered that question this whole series. What are we called to do? What might keeping the Sabbath say to the world around you about the God that you worship? So just to let you know, that pitcher from the Dodgers, he became the youngest player ever to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That probably turned some heads. And that day that he didn't pitch in that World Series on that Sunday probably was a huge topic of conversation with his induction. Think about the open doors that were created, because even before he knew that he was going to become the youngest player ever inducted into the Hall of Fame, God was beginning to open up doors. Some of us need to become faithful in the little things before God will give us the opportunity for some big things. Some of us need to be faithful in just a small amount of time in a week so that God can blow open the doors in some incredible ways in our life. What might your schedule reveal about what you worship? Whew. That's one to wrestle with. What do you sacrifice rest to make time for? What do you, even though you're tired, continue to say yes of doing something else? And you fight through that sleepy with another energy drink or coffee or 5-hour energy or whatever you need to push through to make time for that. When God is just calling you into a space to rest. And the final question, what will we do? Only you can answer that. Only you can answer that question of what God is calling you to do and how you might need to reorient your schedule, your priorities, your life, your time to say yes to Him, to be a witness, to be here in a place of community and worship, to not just go, you know what? Open Sunday, let's go to church. I know, I'm one of the few in this room that gets paid to be here. Sometimes I don't want to be here. What? Yes. But I know that there's so much more at stake, so much greater, in making it a priority to be here in this space. Maybe not for yourself. Maybe it's for somebody else. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this continual command to worship you, to continue to live different than the world around us, to be salt and light. And God, maybe for some of us, that means changing our schedule, changing our calendar, protecting time on a Sunday when so many people are trying to pull us and fight for that time and to want to be in that space and to make themselves that priority. But you say, I want me to be that priority. And that we may have to have some hard conversations. We might have to use that word no that we don't like to. We might have some missed opportunities. We might not make it to practice. Might not make it to a game. We might miss something we want to see or experience. But that ultimately in that moment it would not be a miss. But that it would be a moment to refill us. To give us some hope, some refreshment. And that over time, we would never imagine ourselves away from church with you on a Sabbath. God, I know it's hard. You know everything going on in our lives. Pray that you would give us strength. Give us strength to trust you that you have it all under control. And just like giving up of a tithe from finances and blessings that is already yours, God, you just happen to give some to us. And you test us in that and say, hey, I just want a little bit back. Do you trust me? That we would steward, that we would tithe of our time to go, I don't know how I'm going to get everything done, God, but I know that you've called me to live this life for so many reasons. God, I trust you with giving this time to you. That we would then see a life that is a witness and a light to the world around us that we couldn't even imagine going back to the way that we lived before. God, be with us this week as we make those decisions and maybe clear out some space on our calendar for you, God. May we trust you in what you have called us to do. We praise you for this morning. We thank you for this time of community and worship through singing and bringing tithes and offerings and worshiping you through your word and letting it kind of dig in a little bit and make us uncomfortable. You only care so deeply for us that there's a life that you want for us. May we continue to strive every day towards you. In your son's name, Jesus. Amen.